And without further ado, let me introduce those speakers, Patrick Moran and Art Goetze. Art co-founded Encompass Services, leading 220 acquisitions in 45 states and scaling to $4.6 billion in sales with 36,000 employees. He's since transformed healthcare through freestanding ERs, subscription-based primary care, and Scoop Health, helping employers replace outdated group plans with smarter, personalized benefits using ICHRA, soon to be federally codified as choice arrangements. Also on today's call, we have Patrick Moran, who's the president and co-founder of Royce Partners, a national tax consulting firm helping businesses secure millions in R&D and energy-related tax credits. Patrick has a background in petroleum engineering and a track record that includes leading over $1 billion in captured credits. He now supports clients nationwide and serves on multiple company boards. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. I really do think you're going to love this conversation. I'm going to set the stage a little bit. I want everyone to see this as getting the opportunity to watch two entrepreneurs at different parts of their journeys talk about what it's been like building their businesses, the lessons that they've learned, and hopefully what you take away from this call is all those juicy little morsels of information that you've been looking for from somebody who's been there, done that, that maybe you're curious about. So the format's going to be simple. I'm going to ask some questions, and we're going to get to watch two pros talk about them. So our first one, I really want to jump in and learn kind of, before you guys launched your current business, what was going on in your career or your life that pushed you to start it, that said, you know what, now's the time?
You want to take somebody up first? Go ahead.
Oh, yeah. You know what? Art, age before beauty.
Oh, wow. So, yeah, it's I guess an interesting question that, I don't know that I ever really even, I can't remember when I actually started this business. It's been more of an ongoing evolution, where one thing leads to another. And my latest iteration, though, really was prompted by a really bad problem that exists with group health insurance and a federal change in the law that opened up a new opportunity, and I saw a way to exploit it and take advantage of it and help people at the same time. And that's kind of one of my things I always like to look for is I like starting businesses that help people. Just something about me. I've always loved the aspect of business that produces a positive result for somebody else. I had a rock climbing gym for 28 years for that very reason. Just kind of scratch that itch for me.
Can you, before Patrick answers, can you give us a quick insight into your kind of risk reward calculation that you did when you're like, you know what, I'm going to do this thing? Like, you saw the opportunity, but how did you weigh out is it worth it or not in your head or in your gut?
That's really interesting because it's like, I was telling somebody the other day, and I mentioned to you earlier about what I call the shiny object syndrome, and how do you decide between the shiny objects that you chase, right? Kind of the risk reward discussion, and it sort of happens in the back of your brain somewhere. And I've just learned to be a good rock thrower and really poke holes at my own assumptions. And I ask other people for their opinions before I leap onto the first thing that comes along. So it's like a weak link analysis. I think I try and run before I leap onto the next shiny object, because I've jumped on so many that were false, that had false hope and promise and all of that. And maybe with age you get better at being discerning. My friends all hate me. I tell them, bring me your business ideas, and I will beat the sorry, are we PG? I'll beat the heck out of it for you. And if you can withstand that, then go ahead. But find a friend that will call your BS and give them permission to call your BS, call your baby ugly. And if you can withstand that a few times, then maybe it's worth pursuing.
So Patrick, your experience is a little more recent. Maybe tell us about what was going through your head when you decided to start Royce Partners.
Yeah, absolutely. It founded Royce at the tail end of 2021. And up to that point in my life, I worked as an engineer in oil and gas. I I moved over to consulting and worked for a big consulting firm. And that's really where I got to learn about the wonderful world of the tax code. So that's how an engineer stumbled into over 70,000 pages of the tax code and hasn't, found his way out just yet. Initially, it was, hey, I love the work, and very similar to art, I love, working with businesses where you're really making that impact and helping people. Most of our clients here at Royce and the clients that I had prior to co-founding Royce were that of Main Street SMBs and lower middle market. So really, your businesses that make up the United States economy and need every piece of help that they can get, especially when it comes to really unraveling and unpacking what can seem fairly nebulous and complex, which is that of the code. And with that in mind, really the catalyst was I love the work. I'm good at it. I think I know some folks that would be good at it to partner with, and ultimately, why do this for anyone else other than ourselves? And that really was that catalyst that pushed us to start the firm and begin taking on our own clients, one at a time.
What was that feeling like when you set the business up, when you were like, you know what, I'm doing it? You got the LLC, maybe the first day you made your website. Like, can you describe that feeling, that little milestone, now being able to look back? And Art, feel free to answer this too. Look back on that moment when you finally got it set up, and
Yeah,
tell a little bit about
that's a
that.
fun question, Jake. I appreciate that, because when you start a business, there's all those things that nobody tells you about, right? There's the really obvious components that are some of the most important, certainly, testing the market, getting feedback, as Rick mentioned, from those conversations with his friends, and, iterating upon that and understanding what your customers want, right? Kind of the Amazon approach of having that customer obsession. So that way you're providing a solution that is real and not just something that you've inferred or kind of tripped up, but no one's really going to buy it. And ultimately, in the beginning, when you first make that jump, there's all those little pieces like the system administration. Oh, we need a server. How are we going to set this up? And what does it look like to actually have a domain, purchased in your name, and then create a website? Because initially, IT takes care of all of that at a big company. Well, when you start your own firm, you are chief cook and bottle washer, as they say, right? You are IT, you are HR, you are system administration until you can hopefully be in a position where you can scale the business and actually create those departments or take on contractors that can do that work. But until then, all those little milestones were really huge for us. And a lot of times it felt like, putting the tracks in front of the train. Business and especially professional services, it's all about trust. So image is certainly important, and wanting to work with a firm that, looks legitimate is, very difficult to achieve as a startup, so to speak. It's tough to manufacture something like that because it really can't be. It's something that has to be earned, and that image, is really polished over time. And I think ultimately, looking back on those kind of iterations we've made to our branding, and whether it be one pagers or the website, et cetera, is always fun to see where we've started and kind of how the journey has transpired over time.
Yeah, something you said interesting was that, I think that in before you start the business, I'm a big fan of Clay Christensen from Harvard University's marketing school that came up with jobs to be done theory. Jobs to be done describes everything we purchase. Like, even a pen, I go to purchase a pen, I know what kind of ball I want on the tip, whether I want the clicky pen or the one with the cap on it. And that job description's back in your reticular activator. And entrepreneurs are so guilty of assuming that they know the job description, and we don't. And until you really clearly understand what the job description of your customer is, you got no business being in the business. And you figure that stuff after the fact. If you find that out, like you're 6 months or 8 months or 9 months into it, you go, oh my God, we completely missed the job description. You wasted a lot of energy and time. So yeah, I think it's super clear, and it shows up in your messaging and your mission and vision and your logo everywhere. So yeah, and then that passion, that's what gets you through all the rough spots where you're just like, oh my God, why did I even do this in the first place? And then it's like, no, I know why I did it. And you're the only one. You're the only one that has that passion. And if you don't have that and you can't motor past those obstacles with confidence because you're clear in the mission and the job description, yeah, that to me, that what keeps entrepreneurs alive.
You bring up a couple really good points, and kind of leads us into our next question. But I know entrepreneurship, especially the topic of today's discussion is disrupting the status quo. You are going against the grain. You are fighting against all the winds that have blown for art in the as far as Scoop is concerned for a long time.
That's why I bring up Christensen, because he's the guy that wrote that book. He came up with the word disruptive innovation. He defined the term, and I'm like a disciple of this guy because it's all there. Everything's right there. In that, if you don't get that right, nothing else matters.
And so it can be a lonely road. One, and then two, you saw a problem and you set out to solve it. So what convinced you that you were the right person to solve it and that it was the right time to solve that problem?
So I'm gonna circle back to a previous business to kind of talk about that, and I'll kind of bring it forward to this one. But probably rolling up mechanical contracting companies was purely a financial play, and we made a lot of money doing it. Great. It was opportunistic, but freestanding emergency room happened when I spent 27 hours in an emergency room with an asthmatic daughter that needed a breathing treatment, and we ended up leaving without treatment because the ER wait times were close to 30 hours in Texas. And my next door neighbor was an emergency room doctor, and he said, Arthur, he goes, let me draw you a picture. He drew a picture of these two boats, a big boat and a little boat, and a bunch of lines between them. And he said, it's like having your speedboat tied to a battleship. If we just cut the lines and we set emergency rooms free, they'll be so much better and nobody will wait. And it hit me like a ton of bricks. I was this emotional mess because my kid and all the experience I had just gone through. And I know there's thousands and millions of other people. There's actually people dying, waiting to be seen in emergency rooms. I thought, holy crap, this is going to make a difference. And so that drove me to, I mean, the story is long and fun, but not for here. But that's what lit me up, was this energy that I had experienced as a patient suffering in an emergency room. And I knew I could solve that problem. And we did, by the way. We don't have wait times in tech emergency rooms anymore. It's true. It's true. I'm proud of it.
So, Patrick, I mean, Art, gave a little bit of a personal experience that influenced why he started his business. Maybe talk about a personal experience of yours, either in the space that helped you decide to start Royce to solve a problem, or maybe how a personal experience has influenced the culture that you've built at Royce.
Mm-hmm. No, and I really appreciate Art's anecdote there. And I think ultimately a lot of business ideas and problems to solve happen from moments where either someone that we're incredibly close with, family in this example, uh, business associate, a client, right, is going through some level of struggle. And when it comes to what that struggle looked like in workplace, that I really saw an opportunity with from a business standpoint was the pandemic era tax credit, the employee retention credit, which hopefully most people have heard of at this point because it has been such a disaster in so many ways, right? Fraud, waste, abuse, and that is ultimately what brought Royce Partners' attention to the space. Was there is not a lot of folks in this space that you can trust. There are companies that have no credentials, that are more so the principals have no credentials. The individuals that are actually doing the work itself are really more so focused on the marketing than they are of any compliance or integrity. And again, small to medium-sized businesses, they're already exposed in so many ways. So we saw a lot of small and medium-sized businesses get taken advantage of by companies that ultimately were worried about padding their pockets. And we wanted to come into this space and provide much needed compliance and integrity, ultimately serve and strengthening the U.S. economy from the ground up during a time businesses were heavily affected by government orders, shutdowns, and just the global supply chain disruptions that impacted the global economies during the COVID-19 pandemic. So for us, that's where we saw the opportunity.
So how did you go about, talk a little bit about, I guess, the culture that you guys wanted in your businesses as you started to build those out, and what you saw your role of setting the culture. So you've got the problem set out, you know how you're going to solve it, you're building a team of people to help you achieve that goal. How'd you go about setting up the mission, the vision, the values, the culture, so that you could get people to back you and disrupting that status quo?
I like to find people that see the solution as common sense. They get it, because if your teammates are skeptical of your, in my case, my BS or whatever it is, they just don't buy it, then that's probably not a great hire or, teammate. But, because disruption requires buy-in, because you're going up against the status quo, and the status quo is deep and it's entrenched and it's pernicious. I mean, it's really hard to get the status quo wedged out of somebody's mind. And if your team is not all engaged and invested in that, then that's a no go from the get-go.
And I think a bit on our side, and some past experiences in my life that really influenced what we wanted the culture to look like. I was actually a Boy Scout myself, and something that we've always said is, hey, we want to be Boy Scouts about what we're doing here, right? We want to focus, compliance first, compliance oriented, and that's really tough. That's right. Art's got it. Scouts honor art. So we want to be Boy Scouts about this thing, and really go from a compliance first focus. But ultimately, it's really difficult with a startup because speed and scaling. They say speed beats perfection every time, and perfection is the enemy of good enough. And it can be very difficult when you're focused on as a compliance first standard. So ultimately, it comes down to people that are highly trained, technically excellent, and ultimately will never compromise integrity, which everyone will say, oh yeah, if I have integrity, of course. If you interview someone, you say, do you have integrity? The answer is certainly going to be yes. But that can really only be known once it's tested, right? And that's something that is very difficult. And in any business, whether or not you're a tax credits, an incentive consultancy like Royce Partners, or a software application, there are going to be tests of your integrity. And when you compromise there, you're ultimately creating a culture that is set to reinforce behavior like that, and something that can be lastingly damaging and create scenarios that could ultimately destroy what you've tried to build. So for us, it was a non-negotiable, and we wanted to build things for longevity.
Are there any influences that either of you want to talk about? Maybe Art, I know you mentioned a little bit kind of on the marketing side, the jobs to be done framework, but are there any inspirations that you guys take, or any materials that you guys refer back to as you were on this journey that helped you out with a culture problem or product market fit problem? Just give us a little insight into.
I was this is kind of maybe tangential, maybe back to your previous question as well, but in terms of building teams, a resource that I have used very successfully, and I still have mine on my desk somewhere around here, but there's one in here in Houston called the Berkman. There's another one called Personalysis. There's one called Fascinate. But these are all fairly reliable personality testing tools. and not so much to exclude people, but rather to include people, so that, you know, if you have a small team of people, they're new together and trying to figure things out, you know, having a personality map of each of those people that teaches them how to interact and work with one another under stress. I mean, they're not expensive to do, and I found them very effective in helping a new team kind of get started. It's sort of like an icebreaker, if nothing else, but it's a very insightful way to start a new team, get off on the right foot. I don't know if that's what you were looking for, but it's just one of the tools I use. I do lean on jobs to be done theory, and I use the business model canvas a lot. The strategizer business model canvas is an amazing way to look at a business that's not a business plan so much as a set of component pieces and parts, and how does it work together is uniquely illustrated using that business model canvas. So for a new company that's trying to figure stuff out, that is also a very valuable resource.
Patrick, what are you consuming these days?
I'm sorry, what's that?
I said, what are you consuming these days to kind of help you steer the?
Oh, I thought he was
Yeah.
asking. Oh, I wonder what, you know, they didn't make that illegal in Texas. So Patrick.
I would say, you know, in general, for me, I really enjoy talking with folks that have already been there and done that, had those challenges in their businesses. And as a young entrepreneur, when we first started the firm, that's invaluable, right? And as an engineer by background, that's how I try to be wired, is, you know, looking for, you know, efficiency. And ultimately business is all about you know, making mistakes and learning from them, and not making the same mistake twice if possible, especially on your big mistakes. Although the big mistakes are typically the biggest lessons. However, you know, a slight you know, cheat code around that is, you know, getting mentors. And for me, being a part of Vistage over the last year and a half has been an excellent way to find mentors, and almost have my own personal board in some ways, where we can meet, you know, once a month, uh, talk through an issue, do, you know, issue processing with each other, really to learn about, you know, regardless of industry, you know, we're all dealing with very similar challenges in our leadership roles when it comes to focusing on culture or scaling, or navigating, you know, new legislation that may impact in industry. These are all things that business owners and CEOs alike have to navigate. So for me, that's been incredibly helpful to surround myself with people that I know, that I trust, and frankly that I like, because then it makes doing business a lot easier. You know, when you're having fun and actually, you know, chatting with someone and learning from someone that has the same values as you.
So Art, who do you go to? You're the guy who's been there, done that. Who does the guy who's been there, done that go to?
I am a very active mentor at the University of Houston School of Entrepreneurship, the Wolf Program. And
Yeah.
I find my interaction with these beautiful young minds helps me socialize my ideas, to sort of, you know, it gives me some of that interaction that I need. And, you know, I think, you know, rightly or wrongly, I've probably got most of the experience I'm going to earn, and I'm pretty good at it. And so now for me, I find that whatever it is that I need or scratches my itch is when I'm giving back to these kids. I get as much from them as they get from me.
That's uh, definitely, I found just myself, you know, I always feel like I get the most when I'm giving or trying to teach somebody something that maybe I had learned, especially when trying to understand something. I feel like if you can't teach it, do you really understand it?
You know, it's really interesting. You just sparked a thought in my mind. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but, you know, you get to a point in your life where you just buy your own bullshit. And I mean, at some point you just lean in and you go, you know, I've got this. I'm really good. I've figured this shit out. I'm not embarrassed to say it. I'm really good at what I do. And I help business owners every day. And when I talk to these kids, I help these kids. And when you finally get to that point in your entrepreneurial journey where you've got it, and you know you've got it, there's a certain confidence that shows up in the way you approach everything. And to me, that's where I go, is to that place.
And I I want to. It's not a huge pivot, but confidence is built through repetition, and repetition is only built by doing something, failing, and getting up and trying again. So, talk a little bit about maybe some of those tough moments, setbacks,
I've
doubts,
never failed.
pressures that you've had, and how
Never.
you overcame that and kind of got back on the horse and built that confidence up.
Wow. You want to, here's through the dirty laundry, huh? Wow.
This is an unapologetic, open conversation between people who've started businesses. Art. This is where the money is.
I'll share $1 billion, I'm sorry, a multi-million, no, it's $1 billion story. It cost a lot of money. We structured our roll-up company in such a way that we gave all of our, when we bought a company, we bought them 50% cash and 50% stock. We were a New York Stock Exchange, publicly traded company, so our currency was good. But in doing that, we built in this ridiculous headwind in the stock market that every quarter, like clockwork, they were selling shares. I'm like, no, don't do that. And that's my currency. And so we devalued our currency. It sounded so smart in the beginning. Oh, they won't sell their stock. We'll trickle it out over 3 years. Turned out to be our worst nightmare. And it ended up ultimately, the lenders won. And it was such an expensive lesson. It was so obvious going in the door, but we didn't see it. And that I think, sometimes those lessons what I learned from that is that all money has a conscience. And all money has an exit strategy in mind, and you may not be aware of what it is. In our case, when you're $1.3 billion in debt and your lender says, pay the money back because you're in violation of some silly arcane debt covenant that you didn't realize, right? It got tighter and tighter and tighter because your share price was dropping because you set up this steady flow of shares back into oh my gosh, who would have thought that, right? So, those lessons are hard. So when you take money, be really careful who you take the money from.
It's just so interesting. Like, I want to set up this. I mean, me personally, and Patrick, maybe you're hearing it too, just on the less experienced side, is Art, you're so casually talking about like $100 million types of mistakes as if they were just things that had happened. You came back from it. It's just like it just sparks this thing inside, like the calluses that you've built over time and the ability for you to learn those lessons. I mean, Patrick, again, the whole recency thing, like, is there a lesson that you've learned recently or maybe something you're currently going through that you just don't see an end to, that maybe you can take something away from Art's story? It's like, look, it's going to be okay. You're still standing.
It could be worse.
Yeah.
I mean, for us, it certainly was recent, just, over the last couple of years, when we started the business, one of our core service lines, the research and development tax credit, depends heavily on, legislation, and the fact that it is a permanent part of the code, is something that I think most folks in the space thought, okay, it's a permanent tax code, it's going to continue on, unbothered. Well, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017, created a provision that really altered the attractiveness for companies in the United States to be innovating and spending money on research. And what that did was really, decimate, the credit from the perspective of the market. While it still had a lot of utility, it was still alive and well in its own way. If individuals are investing less and less into innovation and R&D, then ultimately there's going to be less opportunity to claim the credit. And things really came to a head last year when we entered into 2024, and everyone had their fingers crossed and was hoping Congress would make things right and restore that change that had been impacting taxpayers and mainly STEM industries over the last few years. And it was introduced in a bill that was the House, and then it swirled the drain in the Senate. And it was hard to see that happen because we'd already been in a scenario where we were fighting it out. We had no control, and they say you shouldn't be anxious and nervous over the things you have no control over. So that's really the big lesson there is ultimately focus on what we can change and the things that we can make a difference on. And what we did is we put our heads down, we listened to our clients, we created other service lines that they would be interested in, we diversified our income streams, and now where we are this year in the new tax bill, there's a provision to actually make that restoration finally, and hopefully that will really assist our practice, to grow even further. Despite the fact that sometimes when your back's up against the wall, you can do some miracles work, and I think we were able to come up with some pretty excellent solutions and angles to keep the firm in a good position over the last few years, despite that impact to our service.
Hopefully you make it out of the process, because legislation is, as they say, it's like making sausage, and the easiest thing in the world to do is to kill a bill or take something out of a bill. The hardest thing in the world is to get past all the scrutiny, and my story is the freestanding emergency room business legislation. I mean, you fight and fight and fight and fight and fight, and then 18 minutes before the vote, somebody comes out of the woodwork and says, "Nah, I don't think so." Wait a minute, we've been at this for 2 years. Who are you? Oh, I work for the insurance companies. Oh, great.
Exactly.
For entrepreneurs, legislation is a really interesting topic, and we touched on this earlier, that you need to be paying attention. I mean, the current business opportunity that I am pursuing is, as much as I hate to say it, 100% dependent upon a piece of the big beautiful bill getting through the system. We have legislation in there that's going to change the way people do health benefits. It's going to destroy group health insurance. I'm banking on that. But right now it could. Well, we've been through the Congress, we've been out of the House and the Senate so far, but it's never over till it's over. However, there are entrepreneurial opportunities buried in every big piece of legislation. So if you're looking for something to work on, you might pick up the big beautiful bill and read it coast to coast and find what all's in there, because you may not find a business opportunity, but you may find an opportunity that somebody else needs or should be aware of, or that might affect somebody's business quite radically. I wouldn't want to be an insurance broker right now.
It's interesting. Again, the lens at which you view the world, having done this before, now becomes opportunity and opportunity cost, again built over years of doing this. But what's something that you now know, or this ability that you've built to see opportunity, that now that you wish you knew, Patrick, for you 5 years ago, for Art 5 years ago? What's something that you've learned that you wish you knew way back when?
Hi, Patrick.
Yeah, I would say the focus on solutions that your customers want. And I knew that as a tenant, but what that actually looks like in practice, how to step into the shoes of your client or customer, whoever your ideal buyer persona is, what that means to actually do that and listen to the markers and the things that they complain about or we're having issues with. And for me, it would be putting that kind of listening hat on throughout every aspect of the conversation, and not just thinking about maybe one solution or two solutions, however many solutions your business has at the time, that you're hoping to solve that problem with, but things that you may not be able to solve directly. Who do you have in your network that you could potentially connect them with? Maybe that's a business opportunity for a lateral move or a new expansion into a new vertical that is worth investigating. And if you're hearing the same thing over and over again, that's worth paying attention to. And if your clients or customers trust you as the authority to assist them, and you've proven that the work that you're doing is of quality and it's value driven, then ultimately you have a great recipe there for success. So I think being able to listen a bit more acutely, ask the right questions, and really set up a framework to do that would have certainly streamlined some of the challenges that we've had over the years when it comes to packaging things appropriately for our clients, or moving into a new service line, or potentially showing value by connecting them with someone that can solve the problem.
Yeah, it seems like kind of a consistent theme between both of us that a lot of times it's just not about making money, irrespective of the I didn't get into consolidation to make money. I got into it because it sounded like a blast. Go out and buy a bunch of companies. I didn't know anything about it at all. And it really wasn't about the money because I didn't know what money meant back then. I mean, what does that mean when you buy a bunch of companies and go public? I know it was inconceivable. And so it never was about, how much money can I make at this? Patrick, nothing about this is about making money for you either. The money comes with your confidence and your commitment to a good solution that somebody really needs. And you've clearly identified that problem and you've mapped a solution that matches it.
And just the resolve that it takes to continue on with that, even when you hit those roadblocks, I think is that muscle that you build over time, but it doesn't happen in a vacuum. The problems don't happen in a vacuum. The success doesn't happen in a vacuum. Give a little insight, again, as you were building these businesses or going through problems or handling things, what was happening kind of in your lives, in your world? How did you balance, being a business owner with, making sure the house got vacuumed? Give me some of the personal side of, like, is it a support system? Is it podcast? Is it meditation? What helps keep y'all going?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. Yeah. So in my life, well, first of all, I don't know if you guys believe in, I'm a little bit on the spiritual side, and I believe in God, and I believe in guardian angels of all things. And that guy right there, that guy was the founder of Western Electric when they invented the transistor. That's my granddad. I'm named after that guy. He's a legend, just a legend. He's helping me every day. So I have that's my touchstone. But if you don't have a spiritual connection to all of this and to your people and to what you're doing, just none of it just matters. Like I said, it just can't be about money. And so, for me, I know that I'm doing great things. I've learned to trust I think my stupidity has matured into confidence. How about that, right? What started out as dumb luck has matured into an overconfidence that is obnoxious, but it works.
Yeah, no, that's well said. And I think on my side, there's really two different facets to it. One is how do you, continue the resolve even through, the hardship. And I think ultimately when you build a business, if you're not really obsessed with it, at least this is my own personal opinion, and I'm sure others may vary, but if you're not obsessed, with the idea that you have, the solution you're creating, the concept of the vision, like the business and the vision that you have, it's going to be next to impossible, right? Because every challenge that you have, although some may be small and others large, they will accumulate and it wears on you, right? And you hear about entrepreneurial burnout, quite a bit. But if you're not truly obsessed with your idea and full cost what it's going to take to make it happen, then it's easy for that resolve to dissipate. So really, nurturing that obsession then in a healthy way, where on the other side, like you said, Jake, what do you do to make sure the house still gets vacuumed? I was hoping Art, might give a little insight there because that's something I'm trying to figure out every day. But I think to answer the question that you asked even prior to this, of what do you wish you knew? I wish I knew that you didn't have to sit in the chair for 20 hours a day in order to build the business and do it quickly and of quality and for it to be successful, right? Just working around the clock, staying up late, researching, tweaking something on the website, the first few months that we would exist, whatever it would have been. Looking back, being able to have a healthy business mind and experience within the entrepreneurial journey really relies on being well-rounded. You can't be two different people. You have to practice how you play, and that means taking care of those around you and being obsessed with them as well, and whether that be romantic relationships, family, your obligations around the house, like vacuuming, as Jake said, that's something that you have to do because over time, finding things out of balance will slowly chip away at what you're doing in one end of the scale or the other.
Well, Art, you mentioned the shiny object syndrome, and this kind of plays in a little bit to the work-life balance. I guess as entrepreneurs, it just is work and life. It's finding the balance between the two and kind of merging them together, I would assume. But how do you walk me through maybe like how you stay focused on that grand vision as everything comes into your field of view, how you stay focused and how you prioritize, especially as the business grows and there's more moving parts. What does that look like?
Well, for me, bridging, I want to circle just a little back to the bridging the family work-life balance is, I dragged my daughter to Austin with me to sit in the Texas legislature when I was working on the licensing bill for freestanding emergency rooms. And she learned more than she would have learned at Memorial High School, I can tell you that. Right. And I would take my girls to the Kinko's Copy Center with me when we were making packages on acquisitions. And I taught them what to look for when you buy a company. This is what you want to look for right here. Here's how to read the financials. And, here's my 9-year-old daughter who knows what earnings is and add backs are, So for me, I chose to incorporate my family into my business, and I merged the two things together. I bought the Texas Rock Gym as a passion project. It had nothing to do with business. I had too much money and not enough sense. And I bought a rock climbing gym, and 28 years later, I introduced 1,000 people to their first paycheck. New to the workforce. Their very first, hundreds of thousands of families came through, and my kids were right there with me the whole time. They swept the floors, they did everything. And to me, business is life. And I don't think there needs to be a line between those two. There needs to be some boundaries on how we allocate our time, but I don't think you can draw a line between those two. They have to integrate well, or you become dysfunctional.
Yeah, it really is like the ability to find that, especially on that entrepreneurial journey. I think the brain is wired differently when you're starting businesses. That there's just a different brain chemistry there.
You have to be a little nuts, to be honest. You do. You have to be a little.
We all think of it. That you're right. You do need to be a little nuts, but it just becomes you, right? It's okay to lean into that. It's good.
And just, it's, again, I love watching these journeys, and, not only, knowing you two personally as entrepreneurs, but following other entrepreneurs or listening to people's, everyone goes to the Musks and the Steve Jobs and the Bill Gates and, building businesses out of their garage. And there are these nice, flashy stories, but to really get into it and hear what it's like to kind of build these Main Street businesses, and, everyone starts from the same place. I've really enjoyed getting to hear more about that. I want to leave some time for questions, but we're coming up on that 150 mark. Maybe talk a little bit about, Art, you mentioned mentoring students. Patrick, you talked about having mentors and giving back. What's some advice that you would give those entrepreneurs who are in the different stages of business building, whether it's thinking about starting a business, having run one for 5 years, 10 years? What's some advice you'd give the folks out there?
Don't buy your own bullshit. That's I think what back to the shiny object syndrome where we started. It's so easy to throw all your confidence. Entrepreneurs, they're crazy people, and they get so passionate about their solution that sometimes they become blinded to the obvious, that it's not a good solution, or that there's better solutions, or that you're obsolescent before you got started, or you didn't realize that the insurance companies were going to stop paying your emergency room bills. Whatever it is that you didn't think about, I think your ability to think about those things and to have people in your circle that you can trust and give permission to call you out, and to call and throw rocks, and big ones, at your ideas. And if you can catch the rocks and throw them back, then you should keep going. if the rock breaks your argument, then you have to own that too and pick a different idea. It's hard. It's super hard to do that. Super hard, because we're just get so committed, right? And I'm going to be in business, and there's this moniker and this pride of that people associate with being self-employed or being in business or having a company, and they give themselves the title CEO when they have one employee, stuff like that. And that's the death of every good business, is to lean into your own idea so hard that you fall on your face.
Mm-hmm. No, well said. And on my side, it's, don't wait until you feel 100% ready, because if you're anything like me and you chase perfection in what you do, that time will never come, right? So speed over perfection, with the caveats that you're not sacrificing the quality that you ultimately set out to achieve. And something that a couple of things we've talked about already, right? The obsession, listening to your customers and understanding and actually solving a real problem. We touched on a few great pieces of advice, but I would say more broadly, and something that a mentor said to me early on, was don't go crazy with SG&A costs. If you cash flow is king, and chase cash flow, but once you actually start turning a profit in the business, don't suddenly say, oh, now we're going to scale, and we're going to hop into this office that we can't afford, that we're locked into a 7-year commercial lease on, and we hired 30 people without any plan for training and onboarding and what retention looks like, and didn't have the right picture in order to ensure that culture is being maintained and the product is being maintained, or the service, whatever it may be. Going crazy with those decisions early on, it kind of sucks you into the vortex to want to actually feel the success, because you're so excited, the idea is finally coming to fruition. But that's a really easy way to send a business down the drain. You can kill a business two different ways: not enough work and too much work, and jumping down that too quickly, I think, can kill things pretty quick.
Man, it just, thinking about, again, the two different journeys kind of side by side, but years apart, different industries, but how similar a lot of the answers have been, and how many of the lessons are the same, kind of broadly. Again, is it's selfishly wanted to have you all in this conversation, because I wanted to get you two in the same room talking about this stuff. So I hope that everyone on today took away what they needed to maybe hear two folks talking about it and decide to make the jump, or maybe they're in the thralls of it and now they have two more people that they could lean on. Mentorship and having other folks in the space was something big that we talked about. I know Art and Pat both would be happy if you reached out to them.
I'm going for I would like my all-time number of LinkedIn connections in one day to be today. So I challenge everybody on this webinar to connect with me on LinkedIn right now. I would just make my day, just for fun. See if you can blow up my LinkedIn today. Send it to your friends too, just for kicks.
And go to the resources tab at the bottom ribbon and select speakers. And at the bottom of Art's photo, you'll see his LinkedIn tab. Same with Patrick. I'm going to open it up for questions. You can use the Q&A ribbon at the bottom to ask anything. Don't have any yet, and I see Darla just dropped in the chat how to connect. So anybody have any questions? Like I said, you've got two people here who are very willing to answer.
They're just overwhelmed with ideas and confidence now.
I know. I hope everyone feels ready to run through the metaphorical business wall after this call and go start something. I would love to see 50 new business ideas populated.
Be great.
Nothing? Well, I'll keep. Oh, there you go, Darla. Where do you guys see yourselves going next? Either in the business, or maybe once you feel like this one has reached its end?
That's easy for me. My path is ridiculously clear. We're intending to. My personal mission is to destroy group health insurance, if truth be told. I think it's an unbelievable tariff on every business in America. They currently tariff 73% of all healthcare transactions go through an insurance company with a profit motive. There's something wrong with that. And my path with the change in the legislation and the big beautiful bill is going to codify choice arrangements, which is an alternative to group health insurance. It's been described as the 401k for health benefits by the SHRM organization. And my mission is to tell every employer in America that their insurance broker only has half the solution. I have the other solution. I like to talk to employers about that. And so there are a lot of employers that I have to talk to. So I know exactly what I'm going to do next. So that's my mission. I'm going to break the back. I'm going to solve this problem for every business in America if I can. I'm writing a book about it. I'm super passionate about it. And I'm so excited at 70 years old to have a new passion to work on. And it's so impactful. It's really exciting.
Patrick, what's next?
Yeah, for us, we have a few exciting things on the horizon. You know, being a boutique and also a little bit obsessed with our business and just a little crazy, as we said before. We like to, you know, play in the spaces that are very difficult, right? The niches, and ultimately, what that looks like for us is finding industries that are commonly underserved, whether that be for the R&D tax credit. You know, software and technology companies are very commonly, you know, misunderstood with R&D. There's not a lot of folks that can speak the language of the software experts that are within their client base and can adequately serve them. So for us, it's really taking on very difficult and complex, you know, work. We're creating a tax credit insurance policy that is highly novel, proprietary, something that we've been working on all year. And that's very exciting. We hope to launch that, you know, sometime around, you know, mid Q3. But in addition to that, you know, like expert said, we have a very clear focus and vision and path forward. It's really that looks like, you know, bring value to our clients and, you know, within that middle market, or excuse me, lower middle market to Main Street range.
Thanks. And it looks like somebody asked, looking back, is there something you would definitely not do the same if you were starting your company today?
Yeah, don't take that money. Be careful who you take your money from. Yeah, that's mine.
I would say, you know, as they say, you know, hire slow, fire fast. For us, you know, there's been a long journey of understanding what it takes not only to, you know, find the right candidates, but also to be, you know, worthy employers of these candidates. The job market is very different than it was 5 years ago, and even, you know, even more different than it was, you know, a decade ago. It's really an exponential change that we've seen through the candidates that are walking in the door. And ultimately, you know, there's two sides to every story. There's not just, you know, saying, oh, nobody wants to work. It's hard to find candidates that actually want to, you know, come in and be a part of something or, you know, fit this mold. But we also need to be, you know, deserving of the work that they're going to do here. So I think earlier on, understanding what it means to be, you know, build a culture that has, you know, resources in place and in the playbook to, you know, onboard someone smoothly and give them what they need from a training perspective to be successful. It's one of those things that you don't think about early on and really understand what that looks like until you've been through it a few times. So what I would do differently is, you know, having a much more attentive focus to how we're going to hire, and not only hire, but, you know, keep that person retained at the company.
I definitely I know what that feels like. So last question before we end is, if you felt unaccomplished, what made you get back on track? So how did you overcome some of those times where maybe you felt like the vision wasn't working out how you thought it would?
Oh, wow.
Good question.
That's a tough question. Why don't you save the worst one for last? That's really hard. I don't know. I mean, I guess you just have to step back and reassess and decide, is the battle still worth right? You know, I'm like, when the insurance company stopped paying my emergency room, was it worth fighting the battle? I could have just folded up the tents and gone home and shut down the emergency room and fired the doctors and nurses. But instead, I doubled down because I believed in the mission much. Maybe that's the answer. I'm not sure. I wanted to answer Kevin's question real quick. Also, just on the side note, Kevin, no, choice arrangements don't disenfranchise sick people. In fact, choice arrangements are structured so that everybody gets what they need. So healthy people, we should be most worried about the healthy people. The sick people, they get taken care of in a choice arrangement structure using an insurance product. But what it doesn't do is disenfranchise the 80 or 85% of employees who are generally healthy, who are feeling really not too happy about $5,000 deductible health insurance. So that's the answer. Happy to talk more about that in person.
Patrick, anything else on overcoming those feelings of doubt?
Yeah, I mean, I would say if, you're not having feelings of doubt, then you're likely, not getting challenged enough, and maybe things are just going so swimmingly, or, maybe you don't care enough, as people say, that could potentially happen. So I've felt doubt with, decisions we've made, or directives that we've tried to deploy. That's, most certainly happened. And I think what a great way to overcome that is reassess, as Art said, where are we really trying to go? What is our 1-year plan? What's our 3-year plan? Is this challenge or roadblock that we're experiencing, is that incongruent plan? Is there something we can do to pivot? I'm very much let's get the executive team around a conference table for a few hours and have the whiteboard up and, just map this thing out, do a SWOT analysis, talk through it, top to bottom. And at the end of those conversations, either it's renewed faith in what we're doing and how it aligns with the collective vision for the firm, or how, you're right, this idea is no good and we're trending in a direction that isn't there. But, doing some of your work, when you're challenged, I think some of the creative juices can really start to flow in those scenarios. And ultimately, we've came up with, solutions and ways to pivot that would not have happened if that challenge or roadblock not occurred in the first place. So I think those encounters with challenges that shake your faith in what you're doing and create that doubt, can be seen as opportunities, looking back, at least, and how we understand.
Yeah, pivot or polish up your resume, right?
That's right.
Well, again, thank Patrick, Art. Can't say thanks enough to both of you for joining today. Again, thank you everybody for attending. If you want to talk to Art or talk to Patrick or learn more about what Scoop Health or Royce Partners does, click on the resources tab in your bottom ribbon and go to the speaker side, and you'll see more about today's speakers. Also, in that resources tab, you can find links to our remaining 2 webinars in the series. We have 2 left in this leadership series over the summer. I think it's been a great series so far, and I'm looking forward to these last few. And finally, make sure to get that CPE credit. You filled out all the poll questions. And as Darla mentioned, you'll see that certificate come through. And don't forget, if you want to rewatch this, it'll be on our YouTube within about a week. So with that, everybody, have a great rest of your week, and thanks for joining.
Thanks, Jake.
Thanks, Art. Thanks, Pat.
Take care. Thank you, Jake.
See you, Pat.
You guys.
Bye-bye.